Right, ready when you are, Claire.
Okay, right. So, hi everyone. I'm Claire Worthington. So most of you possibly might know me as Claire, who's part of the Goodness Collective. Some people know me as Claire, who's part of Space. Some people know me as Claire from the Village Web Company because I kind of do all of those things. But I usually, whatever I'm doing, normally involves a computer of some sort, and I'm generally wearing a hoodie as well, possibly a pair of trainers. So that's me. The point of today's session, so a lot of us have ended up on different Zooms from one time to another, but sometimes being able to actually run one, you don't always want to be running a session and then discover that you don't know everything about the bits that you don't see at the back. So that's why we wanted to run this session, to kind of give you a little bit of a glimpse behind the curtain if you haven't done it before, and also show you how to get to some of the features that you might not have used but that you might find useful. I'm going to apologise again for the weird noises that my computer makes. Hopefully, it's not going to cause too much havoc. So I'm going to start sharing the screen. So what I've done is I've done it as a presentation, mainly so that you all get a copy of the presentation afterwards. So I've tried to include some screenshots. I've tried to include a little bit of text so that you don't have to remember every single thing. But if you want to take notes, if that suits you better, or if you've got questions, then that's the plan.
Okay. And can I just say hi to Mabel? Sorry about the mess up with the link, Mabel. I'm glad you found us. It was our problem, not yours. So
I see. Yeah, thank you.
No worries. So you haven't missed
so much.
You haven't missed much. We've only just got started.
Okay, thank you, Simone.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I think the first thing we've all learned is that when you're running a Zoom session, that things can sometimes go wrong. So I feel that we've all had a free lesson on that point. So that's rule number one. Let's pretend we did it on purpose. It'll make us look good. So I'm going to share my screen now. So everyone will get a copy of this after.
Okay.
But if you've got any questions, you have to let me know. Simone's about to make me a co-host so that I can share my screen.
I am about to make you a co-host, but just give me a sec.
No worries. Because there's quite a big difference between attending somewhere as a participant and actually being the one that runs the meeting. So a lot of it's quite similar, but there's quite a few bits and bobs, and we just wanted to try and tell you some of those things so that if you decide to use Zoom going forward, that you've got like a few tips to get you started.
Okay.
Okay. So you should now all be able to see the screen that I'm sharing.
Yes.
So it should say how to find your way around Zoom. Okay. So I'm just going to work my way through, and I'm going to talk you through the slides, but you'll all get a copy of this afterwards.
Excellent. Excellent.
So firstly, things to know about Zoom. Firstly, Zoom isn't the only video conferencing option. So there's Microsoft Teams that you might have used. There's Google Meet that used to be called Google Hangouts. There's one called Jitsi. There's lots and lots of different ones. In the last 12 months, I've probably been on about 8 or 9 different video conferencing ones. Zoom is just one particular brand of software. Surprisingly, for those of us who kind of work in tech, the fact that Zoom was the one that everybody seems to have defaulted to was quite a shock, because it wasn't traditionally that well known. And going back a couple of years, there was definitely a few issues that people in the tech industry had about them regarding privacy, etc. But once you become the one that everyone notices, they've had to sort of like butt their ideas up. So over the last however many months, they have really upped the game to make sure that all the concerns that people had have mainly been dealt with. But I just wanted you to know that when we talk about Zoom, Zoom is not the only option. But a lot of the functionality is similar from sort of one platform to another. So the idea that you can see and hear other people on the video calls, being able to share the screen as I'm doing now, having a chat function, being able to do reactions or gestures so that you're not actually speaking, but so that you can still sort of interact with the person doing the call, and also the functionality for the host. So it might vary from one place to another, but essentially most of the different softwares will offer us very similar things. It's just that they might be in slightly different places, or they might look a little bit different. Now, Zoom has a free version and it also has a paid version. So I, for example, because I use Zoom quite a lot, I've gone with that one that has like a monthly subscription of, I think it's £15 a month, which means I can run as many Zoom calls as I like. I can invite other people to it. And if I want to be on a Zoom call for 2 hours, that's absolutely fine. If you're using the free version, there will definitely be some restrictions. One of the most obvious ones being that you can't run a Zoom session of more than 40 minutes, for example. So if you were planning to hold a Zoom meeting using the free one, you really, if you've got half an hour's worth of material, you can't afford to be chit-chatting in between, because Zoom will literally end your call or force you to upgrade. Because I did actually do that. I'm a bit of a cheapskate, and I was using the free version, and then halfway through a call, it was sort of like, you're going to have to pay us. And it wasn't an option of you can pay us later. It was like, you will pay us now or this call ends in 30 seconds. Not the most glamorous way to conduct a meeting. So if it's something that you're going to use on a regular basis, I would recommend having the paid version if that's something that your organisation can afford. Or if you know somebody else who can let you sort of piggyback on their account if it's something that you only use once in a blue moon. But there are definitely restrictions to using the free tier. Now, being a participant, you don't necessarily have to have your own Zoom account. You can join somebody else's Zoom call without having to go onto Zoom and set up an account. You can't really host Zoom calls unless you have a Zoom account. So that's one important distinction. As the host, you control the settings for the call and also those for other people who are joining the call. So you get the option to decide what people are allowed to do or not allowed to do. So things like within the security and within the settings, you can change all those, but only if you have sort of hosting capacity. The example I give for people is that if you imagine you've got people who are teaching classes online. So if you're teaching a group of adults who are all involved, engaged, and there for a particular reason, that's fine. If you imagine having a lot of 12-year-old boys who were all giggling, a bit silly, who got a substitute teacher and access to all the settings on a Zoom call, you can see how that might not go quite so well. Because if you are, for some people, changing your name instead of being called, I don't know, William, you suddenly want to change your name to Bum because that's funny and it'll make your mates laugh. Well, that's something you could do, but by default, only the hosts get to choose whether or not people can rename themselves, for example. You get to choose whether or not I could, for example, change the settings so that people's pictures aren't visible. So a lot of the children who've been homeschooled and they've got teachers running lessons, they can't actually see each other. So the teacher can see them, but they can't necessarily see each other. So there's lots of different things that as the host, you can set it. So it might be for safeguarding, it might be for general security. It might just be so that silly people don't mess about on your Zoom call. Now, one of the things that I always recommend is that if you're going to host a Zoom call, that you always have a passcode. Now, it's not compulsory. You can give people the link, or you can tell people what the meeting ID is for them to join the call without having to add a password. But the problem with that is that the thing with the internet is there are people on there that we don't really want to have anything to do with. If you run a Zoom meeting without a passcode, you are making it a lot easier for people that you do not want on your call to what they call Zoom bomb. They sort of find the details of your call, they join your call, they're not supposed to be there. And sometimes they'll join, they'll do something a little bit silly, wander off. Sometimes they might join and you might be discussing something sensitive that should only be for the people who were invited. Or I do actually know of people who've been on Zoom calls and literally they've had to end the call and then ring the police because people have joined their call and shared some very horrific material. So in terms of protecting yourselves and the other people that you're on a call with, I would always strongly recommend using a passcode. If they can master getting onto Zoom, they can master tapping in a passcode as well. So definitely something I would recommend strongly in terms of security. Adding a co-host can be a really useful way. So by default, the call will be set up by one person. So Simone was originally the host for this. So she's then made me a co-host so that I can share my screen. It's also quite useful if you've got problems with your Wi-Fi that day. So perhaps you're hosting a meeting and then you start getting that little message on your screen that tells you that your internet connection is unstable. I'm with Virgin Media and I see that message far more than I should, considering how much we pay them every month. But if, as the host, if my Wi-Fi completely drops out, that could end the whole call for everybody else. But having a co-host, it means that if one of the hosts goes, there's still somebody else on there while you're frantically trying to log back in and carry on with your presentation. So if you've got problems with your Wi-Fi, definitely recommend having a co-host.
And I've seen that in action on a meeting. I've learnt my lesson the hard way about that, because once you lose your meeting, particularly if it's a big one, it's really hard to get everybody back.
Yeah, definitely. Now, in terms of the meeting as a whole, as participants, you can all leave the meeting at any time. But if you choose to leave, the rest of the call continues. If you're the host, you can close the whole meeting for everybody. You don't necessarily have to wait for everybody to go. You can say goodbye and then you can press the button and have them all leave. But as a participant, you can't force them to stay. They can leave anytime they like. But in terms of closing the whole meeting, only people who are hosts are able to fully end the meeting. And they will, once they click end meeting, it automatically ends for everybody. So lots of things are done by default. So things like sharing screens. So because I sort of joined the call after Simone and Simone was the host, until Simone made me the co-host, I wasn't able to share my screen. But also, I actually use Zoom quite often to help people and to train them on things on their computers. So even though I might still be hosting it, I might make them a co-host so that they can share their screen, or you can make an individual person able to share their screen if you want to get them to be able to present for whatever reason. But by default, it would only be the host that gets to do that. Now, just in case you haven't sort of set up a meeting yourselves before, I've tried to do some screenshots. They might be a bit small depending on what device you're looking at. But essentially, it was just to give you a bit of a clue of some of the things you can do. So you go into your Zoom and you can schedule your meeting. Now, I've called this one Claire Worthington Zoom meeting, which is kind of what it defaults to. I could change that. And if it was a training course, or if I was doing it on behalf of the Goodness Collective, or if it was the name of something, you can edit that and call your meeting whatever suits you. You can select the date and time. You can choose what time zone you're in. Ours defaults to London for fairly obvious reasons, but it might be if you were doing something that needed to be sort of overseas for whatever reason, that's something you can do. It tells you what time zone you're in. Now, for individual meetings, it will generally generate a unique number for every single Zoom call. But if you wanted to use the same number every single time, everyone with a Zoom account will have a personal meeting ID. So if you wanted to, you can always use the same number, which might make it easier for people to get back into calls. I am definitely not the only person who has sort of accessed the wrong Zoom call on the wrong day, or it's with the same people, but the numbers changed and I've clicked the wrong email. So it can make it easier. And also, if you're dealing with people who perhaps are doing this for the first time, but you know you're going to want to keep doing this on a regular basis, but you do get the option. So by default, it will generate a unique number for everyone. The passcode that I was talking about earlier, you've got like a little check button. My mouse isn't showing because I'm on the other thing, but where it says passcode with a number, you can change that if you want to change it to something easier, or if you wanted to make it word instead of a code, you get that option to do that. The waiting room function. So for those of you, when you come to join a call, if you're hosting, you can leave people in the waiting room and then kind of open the door and admit them. which means if you're sort of last minute scrambling, or you want to make sure your presentation's in the right place, or you just brief in another member of the team that perhaps you're running the meeting with, you can leave people in the waiting room. They know that they've joined the call, and it will tell them that somebody will admit you in a minute. It means that they know they're in the right place, but they've not actually joined yet. It's a bit like leaving them outside the meeting room for a couple of minutes. Okay. So this is just an example I was saying about them all having a unique meeting code. And when it comes to an invitation, this is what it looks like. It's over here on the right, but there's a lot of info on there. So it tells you who's inviting you to the meeting. It gives you the name of the topic. So because ours was called Claire Worthington Zoom meeting, that's what's in there. If we wanted to call this Finding Your Way Around Zoom, that would be what would have been in that box. It tells you the time, it tells you the day, and it tells you which time zone it's in. And it gives people a link that they can literally click that link and it will take them to that Zoom call. So they don't necessarily have to have the Zoom app. They don't necessarily have to have a Zoom account. They can literally just click that link. If they already have the Zoom app on their phone or on their computers, then it will usually flash up and say, would you like me to open Zoom for you? It knows that that's the software you're using. If it knows that you have that, it will normally say, do you want to open the Zoom app? And if you do, that's fine. It will open the Zoom app and you can take it from there. Or if you don't have the Zoom app or you choose not to use it, you can just open the link in a web browser. So in Safari, in Chrome, in Internet Explorer, in Microsoft Edge, however they would go and look at a website, it will open it in that web browser. Or they can open the specific program that usually runs Zoom for them. So they don't have to download anything to be able to get onto a call, which I think for some people is really useful for them to know, because it can be a little bit confusing. And also we don't know how new their computer is. It might not be their computer that they're using. This way, as long as they can get access to the internet, they can still join your call. The details underneath where you've got the meeting ID and the passcode, for some people, they prefer to just click the button on their phone that says join a meeting, and then it will say, what's the meeting ID? And that's the number. And what you usually find is that number also appears in the Zoom link. So in the little bit above that, where it says https://zoom.us/ blah, 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 that number usually appears there. So that essentially it knows exactly which one it is. But for people who are joining and tapping the numbers in, we've got the meeting ID and we've got the passcode. And one thing that I find quite useful is if I get an invitation to a meeting, if I'm writing that meeting in my diary and I already know what the meeting ID and the passcode is, I'll often scribble that in, because it means that I don't have to wade through my inbox looking for the email to be able to click the link. I've already got it in my diary. I know I'm doing this meeting at 2 o'clock. What's the right? Straight in there, and it saves me a lot of time. But that's because I've got close to 4,000 emails in there. There's a lot of weird notifications on my computer at the moment. So me having to scroll through to look for one email is not usually in my best interest. All the other information below is really about different ways that you can access. In almost every case, it's generally, I've never met anybody who needed anything below the passcode number. So I would generally, although I always copy and everybody gets all of this information, as a rule of thumb, they either click the link or they put in the meeting ID and the passcode and they get to join your call. But it does, when you first see it, it does look like that's a lot of info, especially if you're seeing it for the first time. It looks a little bit overcomplicated. It's not very user-friendly. So as the host, there are quite a few default settings that are built in where it makes assumptions about what you would or wouldn't want. So I've done another screenshot so that you've got that available for you. So we enabled the waiting room so that if somebody, also for people who like to join early, if they join the call before you've opened it, they can still sit in the waiting room. It's fine. And then when you open, it will tell you that, oh, do you know you've got somebody sat in the waiting room already? It's like somebody turning up outside your shop before you've opened. Same kind of principle. So the option to be able to hide profile pictures, as I mentioned before, at the moment, I can actually see all of you, but as a participant, you can choose not to have your camera on if you don't want to be seen by anyone. But as the host, you can make it so that not everybody's profile pictures are hidden. It allows participants, you can see that share screen isn't ticked. So at the moment, the only people who can share screens are me and Simone, but you can change that. By default, you could make it that everybody could share their screen. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can do it if that's a situation you think will be useful. The ability to use the chat, you can make it that people can't use the chat function. You can stop them renaming themselves if you choose to. You can make it so that they can't unmute themselves, and also allowing them to start their own video. So again, if we've got a school situation or if you're dealing with vulnerable adults, you might want to make it that they can't put their videos on so that you know that people won't be able to see each other. And you can do all that in the settings. Now, one of the other things as a host that you can do is that you can mute participants. So this is the settings for the whole meeting shown on the right. But also, if you're in the middle of a call and somebody's perhaps got a bit of background noise, they might not have noticed it, or they might not know how to mute themselves. You can actually mute individual people. You can just kind of click on it. And sometimes it's quicker and easier. So yes, we do if you're not actually speaking, will you please mute yourself? Sometimes 5 minutes later, you've still got this background noise, and it's often quicker and easier for you to just do it, especially if you've made it that they can unmute themselves. So if later on, if they have got something to say, they can take themselves off mute, but it does mean you've not got to listen to their dog, traffic, whatever else might be going on in the background. Now, some of the settings for individual meetings are only available when you log into the Zoom account. So there's some things that you can do as part of the meeting, and then there's other things that only happen when you actually log in. And I think it's useful to know that, because sometimes we know that something exists because we saw it in a Zoom call that we were in, but we can't find where it is. And often those options haven't been made available because you need to go and change them. Now, Zoom can lead to quite a bit of confusion for people. If you've got people who are quite new and they say you ask them to do something, or they want to do something within the call, but they're not sure how, and then people start getting helpful. Oh, you press the bottom of your screen and this happens, or it's over on the top right, or if you do this, it looks and acts differently according to a lot of different things. So how Zoom looks on my laptop and how Zoom looks on my phone are two completely different things. So when you say to people, well, at the bottom of your screen, it does this. Well, if you're on a phone, it hides that menu. So at the bottom of their screen, there isn't anything. All they can see is the person who's speaking on Zoom. So if they're using an iPhone, for example, then they will have to tap the screen so that the menu even occurs. So if they want to mute or unmute or enter the chat, if they don't press the screen while they're on a phone, those options just won't be there. So having 4 or 5 different people on the call all screaming, it's there at the bottom, not at all helpful, because maybe on their device, it isn't at the bottom. Different versions. So the most up-to-date versions might offer things that you don't have if you downloaded Zoom like months and months ago. If they make any improvements or any changes, you might not have those things. So things like the reactions, people being able to put the hand up, that wasn't always something that was in Zoom. So when we say, oh, put your hand up if you want to speak, and then people go to the right place, but that option isn't there, it might just be that they're not on a version of Zoom that has that particular functionality. So don't assume that just because you're all on the same Zoom call that you can all see the same things, because quite often you can't. And as we were saying before, sometimes you have to go into the actual Zoom account and make certain settings available. So things like being able to run polls or being able to do transcription, so you can add subtitles to your calls. You have to actually go onto Zoom and then make those things available. So if you're in the middle of a call and somebody asks you to do it, if you haven't already set it so that you can't just suddenly do it on the fly. It has to be opted into, which isn't too bad if there's 2 of you, because maybe one of you can run off and do that. But sometimes those new things don't kick in until you've closed and then you start a new call. So if you know that you might want those things, definitely have a rummage about in the account and see what you can do. Now, recording Zoom calls, it's very easy to do. You literally just press the record button. If you record a Zoom call, it means that you can use it again afterwards. So we're recording this one so that people who weren't able to attend can still see the whole presentation. You get an option to choose where those recordings are stored. So it can either store it on the computer that's running the Zoom call, or you can store them online or in the cloud, as it's also referred to. The whole cloud thing for me is a little bit confusing, because when we say in the cloud, what we mean is on a big giant computer somewhere on Earth. Nothing technically lives sort of up in the cloud, but that's a common term. It just means you can store it online. It's always a good idea, and just partly as a matter of courtesy, but also from a data point of view and from just generally being a nice human, try and warn people that you're about to record things. Give them the option to opt out, because depending on why they're at this meeting and how you know them, they might have a very, very good reason to make sure that there's no possibility of them being sort of recorded or captured on a call. So if you're planning to record a Zoom meeting, always tell people that that's what you're doing. In the same way that you would with GDPR, if we've got information about you, or there's a possibility we could have recorded you, we would always tell you beforehand so that you can make an informed decision about whether or not you're happy with that. Most people are, but it's a good idea to suggest ways to help them maintain their own privacy. So, for example, it might be that they might want to rename themselves or take their surname off, or just take their name off altogether. It might be that they want to turn their camera off so that there's no possibility of them being captured. Just give them ways, because most people don't really object to the fact that you're recording the Zoom, but they might feel uncomfortable being captured or being recorded. Because one of the things that people often forget about Zoom calls is that it's very easy to do, and we've got very used to doing it. But essentially, when you invite somebody to a video call, you're asking them to share their home or their surroundings with an audience. And that isn't always easy for people to do for a whole host of different reasons. So try and sort of bear that in mind. As a rule of thumb, when you record something, it pretty much only records the person that's speaking or the host, and it will capture. So, for example, I'm screen sharing, it will capture that. And generally speaking, it won't be capturing anybody else. That's how it defaults. It wants to capture the person that's doing the talking. But just bear that in mind. Give people that option just in case. So the chat panel. So being able to chat, in other words, to type messages, it's a fairly standard feature on Zoom, on Teams, on Google. It's a good way to let people participate, because quite often if you're attending a webinar or a meeting, there's a lot of sitting still and listening and not an awful lot of moving about or getting involved. By having the chat function, it means that people can still share their comments. One thing that you can do with chat is you can send a message to one individual person on the call, or you can share a message that is shared with everybody on the call. Chat is generally available for everybody, and it's a really useful thing sometimes, so you can get people to get more involved without them necessarily needing to speak or to interrupt, because depending on how much time you've got, how much material you've got, you might need to get through, how chatty people are. If you just let people join in the call and let them speak when they want, you can have people. I've been on calls that have gone to 3 hours when they were scheduled for an hour, because people chat, they don't really move on, people are a bit over polite. It's if you've got people, if you need to get through a presentation and you want people to be able to ask questions, letting them ask him in the chat is a really good idea, especially if you've brought in a speaker specifically to do something. You don't really want them trapped on your Zoom call for the next 4 hours. It's quite good for getting feedback, contact details. If somebody's found a website link to something that might be useful to others, you can copy and paste that into the chat so that people can get to it. It's just an extra way of people being able to communicate during the call. Now, at the end of the chat, at the end of the meeting, sorry, at the end of your Zoom call, you can actually, as the host, you can save a copy of that whole chat panel. So if you've used a Zoom to be able to get feedback about something or run some kind of consultation, and people have given you a lot of feedback, a lot of information, being able to copy that and then take it away and go back to it is really useful. So sometimes it might just be because there's one or two comments, but it might be, actually, we've got a lot of really valuable information here. Let's save a copy of that. So when you go in the chat panel, there is the option to save it. So in the screenshot at the right, there's like a little picture and it says file. If you click that, it will give you different options of where you can save the chat discussion. So you can save it onto your computer, you can put it onto Google Drive, you can put it in Dropbox, it can go wherever you want to store it. But I'm just letting you know that if you are using chat and you've got a lot of information, you can actually save that at the end. Now, screen sharing, which is what I'm doing at the moment, now it lets you share whatever's on your computer with other people on the call. So at the moment, I'm sharing a presentation that I've written on Keynote, and I'm able to show you what I'm seeing in front of me. It's also one of the hardest bits to explain to somebody over the phone. And the reason for that is because between clicking the share screen button and people seeing what's on the screen, there's an extra little bit. And that's the bit that even when you share your screen, you can't really show somebody. So I've done a screenshot. So when you click share screen, this is what it brings you. So essentially what it's saying is, what do you want to share? I get to choose what I want to share. So I can share the desktop on my computer. I can share a site that I've got running on Google Chrome. I can share the presentation, which is what I'm actually doing at the moment. So all of those different things are open on my computer. But it's very hard to explain this to somebody over the phone because they click the button, they get this bit, and you're trying to remember in your head what they might be looking at so that you can talk them through it. So I've given you a screenshot to give you a rough idea of what it might look like. Now, I'm also going to point out at the bottom where there's a couple of little boxes, one that says share sound and optimize for video clips. Most people I know have been on a Zoom or a Teams or what have you, and someone's gone to share a video, but nobody can hear it. You have to specifically tell it that you are sharing sound. Because if the video is really important, that can make a difference.
And it's definitely a mistake I've made.
You're definitely not the only one. Everyone's been on at least one call where that's the thing. But being able to share your screen, it's very useful for presentations. You get to choose what you share. Whereas sometimes if you've ever been somewhere where someone's sharing a screen, but you've also got their emails in the corner while they're finding the presentation, you can see messages pinging up because their iPhone is sending messages to their computer. It's much better than that because you get to pick exactly what they see. You're not seeing anything that could be personal, it could be private, could be a safeguarding issue. You pick that actually I'm only going to share PowerPoint, or I'm only going to share Keynote, or I'm only going to share this website. You get to pick. They don't automatically see what's going on, but it is quite difficult to explain to people what they might see after they've clicked the share button. So if you're sharing videos, you can share a video, but just be careful with the sound settings, because if it's one where actually this video and as a rule of thumb, usually the sound is quite important. So always try and be careful of that and maybe test it out if you can. You can share files that are stored on your computer, or if you've got files that are stored online or on Dropbox or something similar, you can go and you can access those. So by default, only the host can share their screen. But as the host, you can give screen sharing capabilities to other participants if that's something that's useful. So this is an example of file sharing. So at the top there, you can see it says basic, which is what we would have seen before, where you pick what to show on your computer. This is what you get to if you choose files. So you've got Dropbox, you've got OneDrive, you've got Google Drive, all the places where you might be storing sort of files or information online. And again, we've got the little box about sharing sound. This is one for videos. So if you click advanced, you can choose to only share a tiny portion of the screen. So for example, if you're sharing a particular thing, but you might only want to share some of it, so that I've set this so I've just got it actually playing the presentation. But if I wanted to be able to see my speaker notes but not show them to you, I could select just a tiny portion of the screen and only share that bit. So it gives you all of these different options, but it's just as a rule of thumb, if you've never done it, why would you know that you're able to do that? So we wanted to try and sort of show you a few things that might come in handy. Now, another thing you can do is annotations. Now, usually these are available whilst you're sharing the screen. So when you've got the share screen up, it will bring you up an extra menu. So you can see I've got a green bar that warns me that I am sharing my screen. There's also a little red area next to it, which is what I need to press when I'm ready to stop sharing. If you click the little pen where it says annotate, you can use stamps, you can write text, or you can like highlight areas. So I've added a couple of gold stars for no reason other than to show you what it looks like. But you can do stars, you can do hearts, you can add extra text, you can draw squiggly lines. And sometimes you'll go on a call and somebody will be presenting and they won't know why there's a lot of squiggly lines on their screen. Essentially, it means that at some point they've ended up in here by accident, but they've not noticed, so they don't know where it's come from. But you can actually do that. So if you were showing somebody something and you wanted to put a little circle around something, you can do that, and you can do that during the call. But usually you only spot that option when you're already sharing your screen. So when you're ready to stop screen sharing, press the red bit. So I've done like a big blue arrow so you can see that that's what you look for when you're ready to stop sharing. Is everyone still okay so far? Cool. So breakout rooms. Breakout rooms are really useful if you want to hold smaller discussions. So if you've ever been on one of those mammoth sort of Teams meetings where there might be like 150 people on there, if you want to have an actual discussion, it's not ideal, because what happens is you get one or two people who are very vocal, who will be the only ones that talk. And it's just not, if you've got too big a group, it just really doesn't work. But what you can do is you can make your own separate rooms, and then you can choose to which people go in there, or you can say Zoom automatically spread people about. So if you've got 10 people and you open 2 rooms, it'll just put 5 in each. Or you can say, actually, we're going to have one room where we talk about SEND. So everybody who's involved in special educational needs and disabilities, you're going to go in group 1. And everybody who's involved in things to do with, I don't know, children's activities, we're going to put you in a completely different room. Or you might break them down in different areas. It might be that you want to mix people up. So you might want somebody from the council in every room. You can pick and choose whether you assign people to an individual room, or whether you just say to Zoom, just split people up and just send them out. But it means that you can have smaller group discussions. And also, if you're holding quite a long meeting, it's good for people to be able to talk and to kind of get involved. It's quite useful if you're doing online training, because you can send people away, let them discuss a topic, and then you can bring them back, and somebody from their group can share what that group has found. So it's a good idea, but I would recommend trying to have a facilitator if you can, because otherwise you can put people in a group if you want them to discuss something. There's no guarantee that's what's going to happen. And again, you can have that thing where 1 or 2 people might be a little bit more vocal, and they're not really having a group discussion. They've just got an audience that they can sort of talk to. So if you can try and have a facilitator, it's not essential. You know what kind of meetings you run, and you know the people who normally attend, but it can be useful. Now, when it comes to creating your breakout rooms, by default, it will just call them room 1, 2, 3. It will just number them, but you can change the names. So if you wanted to make it clearer what people were, as you can see on the left, I've kind of called one room Claire, one room Jeff, one room Sausage. You can call them whatever you like, it's fine. Or you can just leave them as room 1, 2, 3. It's, if you think it's important, you can do. And then you can also type messages that you can share with people who are already in the rooms. So it's quite useful if you want to warn people that they've only got 5 minutes left, for example. Now, at the end of the breakout session, as a rule of thumb, you set your rooms up and then you will normally give people a certain time. So you might say, right, I'm going to open the breakout rooms. This is the question you're all going to discuss. You're going to come back in 10 minutes. So people have got an idea it's going to be 10 minutes. But at the end of the 10 minutes, or if for some reason you want to end them earlier, you can actually just close the rooms. And when people leave the rooms, they then come back into the main room. So at the moment, we're all in the same room. And then if we did breakout rooms, you would then go away from here into a separate room. And then at the end, you come back together. So very useful for sort of group discussions. The one thing that people aren't always aware of is that when you get to the end of a breakout room, even if you're mid-sentence, it will zoom you back. It's a little bit like being on Doctor Who. 1 minute you're there, you're halfway through something, and then you've gone, and then you're back in the main room. So it will usually tell you that you've got 60 seconds. When I get the 60-second warning, I just talk a bit quicker. But for some people, it's good to know that actually it's about to end so that you can get to a natural pause. Or if you've had somebody who hasn't had a chance to contribute, you've got that last minute to say, oh, Bob, have you got something to add? It just gives you those warnings. But once the time's up, it goes and you literally, you just leave. And it can be a little bit unsettling the first time that happens. Now, another thing you can do when you're hosting a Zoom is that you can run Zoom polls, which are like little quizzes or questionnaires. So you can create the questions beforehand, or you can do them during the call, but it can be easier to do them before, especially if you're the only person doing it. When you're editing them and doing things, it's generally done on Zoom site rather than directly in the middle of the app. But also when you've done a Zoom call, you can actually display the results during the call. So you can display it, people have a little bit of time to fill it in, and then it can display the results. So I've done you a couple of screenshots so that you've got these to look at. So you can give your poll a name. You can choose whether or not people can sort of be anonymous. You get to pick whether it's a single choice or multiple choice. You get to ask the question and then give them potential answers. So over here on the right, we've got question 1, do you like sprouts? Yes, no, sometimes. You've given them those options. So you can see on the left how I've done that. So do you only eat sprouts at Christmas? I've kind of gone with like a yes or no. I don't know why I was thinking about sprouts. I don't even like them. So you've also got things like what's your favorite flower, and you can pick whatever's relevant to your conversation. But the other thing that you can do is that you can show the results and you can show a percentage of how many people have responded. So do you only eat sprouts at Christmas? The problem with sort of doing Zoom calls by yourself so that you can make screenshots is that you don't get very interesting results. So nobody responded to any of my poll questions. So our results are automatically that nobody answered and it was a 0%. But if we did this poll now, you would have actual results in there. But I just wanted to provide you with a screenshot so that you got it. Unfortunately, I've spent the last year doing a lot of Zoom calls by myself so that I can take pictures of things and be able to share them with people. So I'm going to stop sharing now, come back into the room, and see, has anybody got any questions, or is there anything that you particularly want to know more about, or that you'd like me to sort of try and demonstrate if we can? Deadly silence. Oh, thank you. So one of the other things that I was going to show you was the reactions, because that was something that hasn't always been there, but that is now. So Sue, for example, you can see that she's kind of done like the little clapping thing. So it's a good way of getting people to be able to either give it a thumbs up or what have you. So sometimes you can use the chat for people to participate, but also the reactions are really useful. So it normally turns up in the menu. So if you're on a desktop computer or a laptop, it's usually at the bottom, and it's normally like a little smiley face with a plus. And if you click that, it gives you the different options. So people can clap, they can thumbs up, they can give it the heart, they can celebrate it. But that's also if you ask people to raise their hand, that's where it is. The thing with the hand raising is quite often people put the hand up, then they talk, and then they forget to take the hand down. But it's always something to be aware of. It's a good way for people to let you know that they're waiting to speak. But that's where they live. They all live in that one spot. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to cram too much more into it because otherwise you don't remember it all. So I've tried to give you sort of screenshots of most of the things so that you can see it later. So it might be that you don't host a Zoom for another 3 months, and then it'll be like, wait a minute, what did she say again about doing that? So you'll have your own copy of the slides to refer back to.
Tell me again where you get the Zoom polls from. I just missed that bit. So I got how to do it, but where is it on the screen? I'm on a desktop.
Okay, how to get to what? Sorry, can you say that again?
These polls, doing a Zoom poll.
Oh, doing a Zoom poll. If you don't already have the host host capabilities, it won't be there. But let me show you what it looks like. Give me 1 second, and I'll go back to.
And also, I think, Claire, that's what you said about it's really important, I found, like to check the settings before you start the meeting, because things like the breakout rooms and the polls, there's like tick boxes in the settings, so certain boxes won't appear unless you've got those ticked before you've even started the meeting.
Right, okay.
Yeah, because it took me ages to find the polls and also the breakout rooms. I knew that it was available, but I couldn't see it, and I had to actually go on like Zoom, onto the Zoom website, log into my account, and then make that available.
Yeah. So the Zoom bit, there's kind of like 2 parts to it. There's how you set it up for general use, and then there's like once you're in the meeting and you've created a meeting, whether you use those or not is up to you in each meeting. But if you don't tick that setting option, it doesn't allow you to do it in the meeting.
Yeah. Now, usually I've found a screenshot, but I did this screenshot before I activated the polls. So if you were logged in as a host, this is roughly what it looks like. So being able to share your screen, record, the closed captions, but again, you have to go onto Zoom to make that available. And I did actually test it out yesterday because one of the things that we want to do is we want to be more accessible. So, for example, we run sort of sessions for like the Wave of Change ladies who are on a program that the Goodness Collective runs. And for some of those ladies, English isn't their first language. So if you imagine being on a Zoom when there's like 10, maybe 20 people all together, all talking, and you're trying to follow that conversation and it's not in your first language, that's probably a nightmare. It's not something I've ever had to do, but we're going to try testing that out. I did find that if you speak quite slowly, the automatic transcribing works a lot better. If I talk at my normal speed with my Manc accent, it doesn't quite understand what I'm saying, and it made a few interesting sort of variations. But it's something that if you can't afford to always have somebody else there, that's an option. But also one thing you can do, if there's 2 of you, you can get somebody else to actually type things up and then just have it. So one person's actually doing the presentation and somebody else, one of the people on the call, can actually type up what's been said and then they can share it as they go along. But I'd recommend, if you're going to do that, definitely think about what's going to be said to give yourself a bit of a heads up, unless you do happen to be like a touch typist and you've sort of got that kind of experience. But this screen here at the bottom, this is what you would normally, that's where the polls would normally be. So you would click that and then it will bring you up the options to to choose your own questions and decide what possible answers people can have. I'm just trying to find that screen again so I can wheel it back up. There you go. Can you see that screen there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you would normally have the polls option, and then you click polls and then it lets you create your questions. But if you want to tweak it or make any changes, it tends to take you out of Zoom and then take you off onto the internet so that you can edit them or do those changes. Does that answer your question, Denise? I'm hoping
Yes,
that's
thanks. Yeah.
cool.
I would say some of it is a bit like with the video, finding out after that it wasn't working properly what I needed to do about sharing that sound. Some of it is just a bit of a test and learn and practicing a few bits, like obviously with people that you know or in your organization, and just checking that again, like you can see those buttons and the settings are working for you, and you've got access to breakout rooms and polls if that's what you want. So it's a bit of trial and error, some of this.
Yeah, but if anyone does want to do like a trial Zoom, let me know. We can do that. So I can, if you come to set one up and you think actually I could do with a bit of backup, then we will kind of try and help you sort of set your things up. If you're trying to, especially if you're trying to do something specific and you can't remember where it is or how to get to it. So that offers there if people find that useful. So.
Yeah, and I think on top of the training, what we kind of said at the beginning about it's useful if you're running a meeting to give people some of those tips. So, you know, not presuming that people know where the chat is or how to use it, not presuming that people know how to mute and unmute themselves. And also that stuff about renaming, we've had that quite a few times, haven't we, Claire? That, you know, if you hover over your own picture, there's kind of 3 little dots. And if you don't already know, the option to rename yourself is in there. And a lot of people who've come on the call haven't known that. And then we kind of take that for granted now because we do it all the time. But just if you've got new people accessing Zoom for the first time or not very often, it's just worthwhile doing that really before you start the rest of the meeting, because that helps them to engage properly with what else it is that you're delivering.
And also it lets them feel more comfortable, because what I find by training people in any kind of digital skills, if they're quite new to something and it doesn't go well, they always think it's their fault. And quite often it isn't their fault. They're doing everything right, but they click a link and it didn't work, or, oh, well, I can't find that. So we're all sitting there saying, oh, it's at the bottom of your screen, but they're on an iPhone and they don't know that they have to touch the screen to make the menu turn up. And then when the menu turns up, there's 3 dots over to the side. And when you press those 3 dots, it gives you more options. But everybody else, if everyone else is using a desktop, they're like, oh, it's at the bottom, you just press that bit. And they're looking, they can't see it, and they instantly think it's them. And after a bit, most people, if they ask a question and you give them an answer and they can't find it straight away, they'll just leave it, and they just won't get involved. Not everybody feels comfortable. They'll just say, oh, it's fine, it's okay, I'll find it later, or what have you. So the more tips you can give people at the beginning, the more chance there is that they can forget about using Zoom and just take part in your meeting, which is generally what you would want them to do.
If I'm setting up a meeting, which I will be doing tomorrow, last time I did it, I set it up the day before and sent the link out to everybody, to all the participants. But then when I came to start the meeting, I couldn't remember how to get back to that meeting. So what I had to do was go to the email I'd sent people with the link in and send it to myself, so I could get there through the link I'd sent them. So I couldn't find how to get to the meeting as the host. Every time I pressed what I thought it was was setting up a new meeting again.
Okay, well, when you go onto Zoom, I can only talk about how it looks on a desktop. I'm not sure what it looks like when you do it on a phone, but you have the option to schedule a meeting, to join a meeting. What's the other one? And I think there's one that just says meetings. So if you click meetings, it will normally give you a list of all of them. So if, for example, if I've scheduled all the Zooms that I'm going to do in a week, then I just find that particular one and click it, and then it will let me start that particular meeting.
Right, okay.
I think from memory, Sue, actually, you're onto something there, because I think it lists schedule a meeting or host a meeting, but I think you go into like my account to see the meetings that you've already scheduled. So I think there's, Claire's right, there's 3 buttons, but I don't think the third one says meetings. I think it is your setup on mine. That's what and then when you go into your setup, there's the bit about the settings, and then there's also a meetings tab, which is the meetings that you've already set up. So just try that. It might look the way Claire said, but on mine it definitely says, because I've had that issue myself, that because obviously we have the Sector 3 account and then we have the Goodness Collective account, and depending on, that's the other thing, if you're running from 2 accounts, whatever you've last logged in on, it will just naturally on mine log me back in. I can end up being in one meeting looking like I'm Joe McGrath from Sector 3. It was like, who's this?
So mine has like little icons, mine has actual buttons on it, so you get to schedule a meeting or like join a meeting. So it might look different because I'm using a Mac, and it might look completely different on Windows, but I only ever use Zoom on either on my phone or on this, and I only do it on my phone if I'm if I need to. I try and be here on my big computer as much as possible because I fidget a lot less.
To get into Zoom for me, because it was set up for me by one of my management committee, I have to go into Zoom US. Is that normal?
Yeah, because Zoom is an American company. But I think when we register from here, because one of the things I looked at was when it stores when it's actually like recording anything you've done or what have you, ours are stored in Ireland, which I think is because we're kind of in Europe. So I think from kind of a GDPR and a privacy and all of that side of things, I think that Zoom US have actually got a base in Ireland as well that they use for sort of people in England to register from.
Right. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. Sorry, that's my computer again doing the Justin Timberlake shuffle.
From running the VCSE forums, there's a little tip as well that you'll know, Sue, when you come on the forum, sometimes even though you send the link out, people can't find it or they're on a phone and they need it. So if you go in, if you're in a meeting and people ask you to send them the link, if you go into participants, which is one of those boxes across the bottom, or wherever you have it, then you can invite people directly into the meeting from that participants link. It kind of says invite, and it'll send you to your email, and it'll send the link to the meeting that you're in to those people. I found that helpful rather than trying to run a meeting and then trying to find sending it out to people who can't get in it. It's quite a good one to know about.
Yeah.
Sometimes also, if I send the invite out, sometimes it's in normal text where they have to put the ID code and the password in. Yeah. And sometimes it's a blue link where they can just click. But I don't think I'm doing anything any different, but they don't always get it. I prefer the blue link where they just click, but I don't know what to do wrong, that it doesn't always do that.
No, that's unusual, because usually I get the big gibberish box where you've got the link, but you've also got the meeting code and the passcode, and then there's all this other stuff. If you're in California, dial this number kind of thing. Most of which I tend to ignore as much as I can, especially with people who, if I'm showing them how to get onto Zoom and they're quite new to it, I feel that all of that can feel a little bit overwhelming for them. So I try and sometimes put spaces in the middle and just ignore the bottom bit. So.
But can you get it just so you get the blue bit, just the blue link that you just click that and it automatically takes you through that having to put anything in?
Yeah, it should do, because that link is is unique to that particular call. So it has all of that information. So it already knows the meeting ID.
Right.
So it should, usually they send both, but I'm guessing depending on, it's one of those weird things where maybe it does something slightly differently depending on what you're using when you send it.
Okay.
I'm going to stop the recording now. You can carry on asking questions, but I'm just thinking in terms of people watching back, they've probably got the useful information bit, and we can